that we need. Oh, that's loud. So we're going to get started this evening for the town board work session for June 19th. It is 6:03 p.m. We have 4 items this evening on the agenda. The first one is a roadway improvement plan and road impact fee update. Mr. Balstead?
Thank you, Mayor, Town Board. We do have a lot of information to cover tonight, so I'll just make a brief introduction. We have Elliot and Shay from Felsberg, Holt, and Ullvig for this item. And on the phone, we also have Clancy with Duncan and Associates. So Felsberg is the consultant primarily responsible for the road improvement plan update, and Duncan Associates is primarily responsible for the road impact fee update. And as you'll recall from the kickoff meeting, the town used the same consulting team to adopt road impact fees originally back in 2001. And then the same team also helped us with updating those documents in 2008. And the code does require periodic updates, and this is that update. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elliot and Shay to run through some PowerPoint slides on the status of the draft updates.
Thank you.
Very good. Good evening, everyone. Today what we'd like to do is do a brief overview of the status and where we're at in the project, and then talk about the 2 pieces that Scott mentioned, the roadway plan and the road impact fee update. The roadway plan is in draft form, and the road impact fee update is in very draft form. It's in preliminary form. And then get questions and answers, and then get your guidance on proceeding forward from here. Again, as Scott said, I'm Elliot Sulsky with Felsberg, Holt, and Ullvig, and we're on the roadway planning side of the project, and Shay is here with me to answer questions that are the hard ones and I can't answer. And Clancy from Duncan Associates in Austin, Texas is on the phone to answer questions on that impact fee. The project schedule, where we're at, we got started in January of this year. We've done a pretty accelerated schedule to get the answers in time for kind of budget season. So we had a initial workshop with the same group, with the board and planning commission in, I guess it was late January. At that time, we added a few other meetings more than we had initially scoped, including this one. So we've had more blue dots than are shown here as far as workshop meetings with staff. But where we're at now is the June 19th workshop, and then there's a July 17th workshop planned for a month from now. The idea was at this workshop, we'll give you where we're at with the roadway plan and initial calculations on what the impact fees are looking like. And the fees are, we calculate the maximum fees that you could enact if you wanted to go to that level. You could enact something less than that. You could enact it over a period of time. We have in 2 weeks, the 29th of this month, we have a stakeholder meeting planned. So that's with developers and home builders who are active. So what we'd like to get tonight, when we get finished, is kind of an okay to go ahead and have that stakeholder meeting. And then what we planned for the second meeting, that July 17th meeting, is we would come back to you with any tweaks to the plan and with the input from the stakeholders group. And then that would be more of a decision meeting where you would kind of decide which way you want to go on the fees. So that's where we are now, and we had planned for adoption in August. Come back to you yet again. This is kind of a first step in developing the roadway plan, is to develop the functional classification system. And this We're proposing to do it a little more formally than actually the last roadway plan in 2007 and 8, to have some more specific definitions of the different categories. So this shows, I obviously won't go into great detail on all these, kind of what's in all the cells, but we look at the functional priority. Are roads mainly to provide mobility or mainly to provide local access? What's the continuity? Are they intercity roads or minor local roads? Typical trip lengths, number of lanes, is it 2 or 4 lane road, access types, and traffic controls. So based on those characteristics, we created 5 different types of roadways and classify each of the roads in Windsor in those categories. The major arterials, which the 2 state highways are in the major arterial category. Minor arterials, major collectors, minor collectors, and locals. One change that we've made in coordination with staff over the last couple of months is in the previous plan, there's only 1 collector street level. It's just collectors. There are urban and rural versions of that, but only 1 actual classification, collectors. What we decided was the right thing to do this time was to make a distinction between a major collector and a minor collector with, you'll see the different characteristics, but the major difference, the way we're looking at it, is a major collector tends to be sort of a major system road that connects between different neighborhoods, between places. And a minor collector tends to be more interior to a given development or a given land use or a given neighborhood. The first 3 categories, major arterial, minor arterial, and major collector, we have in mind to call that the major street system by definition. And the major street system is that street system that the road impact fees are eligible for. So we would say that local streets and minor collectors are the developer's responsibility to build those streets. They primarily serve the one development. So that's kind of a new distinction.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry. How often do streets or roads go between these categories? Do they ever graduate up, or do we know in advance this is going to be a collector, so it's...
Yeah, good question. The map we've developed is intended to be the functional classification plan. So it's the future. It's what you want to grow into. And in some cases, in fact, oh, by the way, we have 3 maps on the PowerPoint that we knew that you wouldn't be able to see too well, so they're in your handout in a little more legible fashion. For example, there are some major collectors that right now might be a gravel road and it might carry 100 or 150 cars a day. So you would say, what's major about that? It's a minor street. But in terms of its functional classification, so what's its role? Well, if it's a section line road and it's got 3 miles of continuity all the way east-west across Windsor, we say that that's a major collector or a minor arterial, and it'll, you know, like you put it, it'll sort of grow into that as traffic increases. We were using an analogy in trying to describe this as you look at a rural 2-lane or a rural 4-lane freeway in, you know, the rural Wyoming somewhere that might carry a couple thousand cars a day. It's a freeway. It's a major, you know, it's got hundreds of miles of connectivity, so it's a major road, even though it doesn't carry that much traffic. Contrast that with the local street that connects in and out of a busy shopping center. That might carry 10,000 cars a day, but yet you wouldn't consider that an arterial. So we try to set the classification for kind of what what the system wants to grow into to have a nice connective system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this map is the functional classification system. As I said, the state highways are classified as major arterials, and the major arterials include generally the state highways, County Road 74, Crossroads Boulevard, and Fairgrounds. I think I hit them all. Those are the major arterials. Then the minor arterials are in blue. You'll see they tend to be section line roads that have 3 or 4 or 5 miles of continuity, and then the major collectors. And ultimately, when the impact fee study is completed and there's an ordinance, the impact fee, there will be a map like this that'll say, those are the major roads. Those are the roads on which you can make improvements based on impact fee money, on which a developer that builds a road gets reimbursed for roads on that system. And so you'll see that this includes those green roads, some of the minor collectors. So they would not be on that map that shows the major roads that are impact fee eligible. So it'd be the blues and the reds and the purples on this. Okay. Here's one definitely in the category of you can see it better on your handout than on the map. We did traffic forecast to the year 2040. The last plan, I believe, went up to 2030, so we're updating it 10 years. We used the North Front Range Planning Organization regional model to do our forecasting. The regional model has adopted population and employment by zone throughout the whole region, including in Windsor. Planning staff looked at those forecasts and did some tweaks and added some known developments and some just from more on-the-ground knowledge of Windsor as opposed to the regional look. So those numbers were tweaked a little bit. You can see that the forecasts from 2015, which is the base year for the model, 2015 to 2040, households increase is 168%. So much more than a doubling, closer to a tripling than a doubling of number of households. And population, of course, follows right along with that. And employment, again, more than a doubling from 14,000 to 32.5. Yeah.
I don't know if you want questions while we go through this, or if you want to wait to the end, but.
Yeah, your
specific to
pleasure.
this, I just wanted to clarify, I think I know the answer.
Mhm.
You talked about the staff tweeted the projections, including things like maybe a major retailer coming into town or a sports park. Is that included in these projections as much as we can
Yes.
guess?
Yeah. Again, the regional plan does sort of top-down regional projections based on state demographer projections, and they're pretty good at the big level. So we kept within those totals, and then in Windsor itself, staff knew about certain projects that hadn't been in the data when the North Front Range data was last.
So we feel, even though some of these areas may not have done traffic studies yet, feel pretty confident that these are our best guess right now of where we're going to see significant increases. Okay, I see the heads nodding. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think that's a perfect way to put it, is confident that it's our best guess.
Yeah,
Because it's,
exactly,
yeah, it's
exactly.
the future, and yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Looking at the forecast, so what this map shows is the numbers on top at each location are the average daily traffic currently, and the last time a count was taken, which is generally 2015 or 2016. And the number on the bottom is the 2040 forecast. So you can see some increases, you know, that this follows right along with population and employment, yields trip generation, yields traffic. So so you do see more than a doubling of a lot of roads. Crossroads is an example where you see some current 11,000 and forecast is 32,000 and 10,000 to 30,000. 257, County Road 17 to the north is another one that there's more than doubling of traffic forecasted. Fairgrounds is another real steep forecast, set of forecasts. A lot of the minor roads that are kind of sleepy roads now, where there's new development planned in those areas, see an increase from in the hundreds to in the thousands. Some of them, like I'd say Main Street, State 392 downtown is probably the smallest increase of all of these because it's constrained. We're assuming that it stays at 2 lanes and it's pretty well constrained, so you'll see much more modest increase there. And as Crossroads gets completed and improved, and County Road 70, those, as you know, the intention is to relieve some of the pressure to have other alternative east-west routes.
Question for you.
Yeah.
The previous projections, how accurate are they to, like when you did the original projections for 2015, how accurate are they when they compare out? I'm just trying to get a...
You know, I took a look at that a while ago, and I remember feeling decent about it.
Okay.
But yeah, well, I'll have to go back and do a little more thorough check.
Okay.
You know, I know since last time was right before the recession started,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you know, you were much more bullish about growth at that time, and then there were kind of 4 or 5 or 6 maybe slow years. So the increases are just kind of getting going.
Mm-hmm.
So whether, you know, the flat and then, you know, has, whether that met the, the more gradual curve, I'm not sure.
Does your model take into account for those potential slowdowns and that may lead to, you know, compared to the projection of growth?
It does, and that's why we always do 20 plus year to 2040 forecast, because, you know, no one can know is the next recession going to be in 2022 or 2027, but you can pretty well bet there's going to be 1 or 2 of them in the next 20 years, and there's going to be some booms. So yeah, when you go out a ways, it's kind of, we're real good at knowing what's there now.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good at a, you know, 20-year horizon, and then whether it's, you know, exactly how it gets there is much more dicey.
While you're on this chart, may I ask a question? I didn't bring my glasses, but I should have. But on Eastman Parkway, coming in from the east, is that 11,000?
That, actually, that 11,000 is pointing to State Highway 257, just north of Eastman.
That is?
Eastman Road, just east of 257.
Well, I looked at that too, but
There's a
I won't have-
9,500 number.
I'm sorry, what?
On Eastman, just east of 257,
Right.
there's an indication there that's current count is 4,000, and the forecast is 9,500.
I see. And that was 2015?
The counts are generally 2015 or 2016, and the forecasts are 2040. So 20.
And then going on west on Eastman Parkway, then that's 3,000?
On Eastman,
I'm-
There's, all the way to the, on the east of town, east of County Road 23, we have a 2,700 existing and 7,400 forecast.
Okay, and I should have been looking at the bigger chart, Scott. I see that now, that it's very easy to read that chart.
And it's still.
Well,
a
I have
pretty-
another question, but I'm gonna ask
pretty
it
busy
later
map.
on about that, so.
Okay. One thing you'll see on this map is a few dashed lines. The dashed lines are roads that don't exist but are on your plan, on the comp plan, and they're in the functional classification system. And so we redid the forecast model with those new connections in there. This is a pretty technical step, but let me just walk you through it real quick. So to identify the future needs, we look at, there's a level of service, which you've probably all heard level of service at least once or twice, but it's an A through F rating of how congested a road is, where A is no congestion, free flow. F is really bad, is more cars than capacity. And level service C is sort of in between, and that's Windsor's and many kind of smaller communities kind of threshold. Their desired state for a peak hour is to have a level service C. So so we look at a planning level, and every road is a little different, and you really have to do individual analysis of roads and look at the intersections, look at the turning movements and access points and a bunch of things to really look at the specific level of service. But sort of at an overall planning level, we developed thresholds for what's the daily traffic that road was sort of built for at a level service C kind of thing. So, so these are the thresholds we use to do that analysis. A 4-lane major arterial, about 30,000 cars a day, starts to be pretty congested. So over 30,000, we tend to talk about recommending widening, and down 22,000 for minor collector. Kind of most of the existing roads in Windsor are 2-lane roads. For major arterial 2-lane road, 15,000, and minor arterial or collector at 11,000. Rural's a little less because they tend to have less turn lanes and kind of less amenities. Okay, another building block for our planning is when we look at the needs, we're updating the unit cost. So we develop average unit costs for building different kinds of roads per linear mile, and then apply that to the needs that are identified. Just like level of service, road cost is another thing that's very variable, and you're gonna have to actually design any given road, and it might have more or less drainage features than something else, or more or less signalized intersections, a lot of variables, but we come up with pretty decent kind of average typical planning level costs. And this is just a section that we'll have in the report. We'll have a sheet for each of the 8 or 9 different roadway types that'll show the cross section, which I think we're going to talk about later, another agenda item, and some of the different components that come up with that cost. So yeah, there'll be 8 or 9 of those sheets in the final report. And here's the bottom line for, this shows the cost per mile estimate for each different roadway type. So the first 4 are new roads, or new from 2 to 4 lanes, widen urban road, and upgrade from rural to urban. On this map, the yellow highlights that are, I don't know, a quarter of the roads or so, those are the roads that have been designated as urban. So they would have the urban section with curb and gutter and sidewalk, and kind of the upgrade, more of the urban amenities, the urban look. The roads that are not highlighted in yellow are the rural roads. So they would have typically shoulders and drainage ditches on the side, and maybe trails, that sort of thing. So when we get to the costs, the urban sections for the same laneage cost a fair amount more because the new, like widen urban road from 2 to 4 lanes, $3,170,000 per mile, and widen a rural road to $540,000 because again the urban has some of the sidewalk, curb and gutter features that cost a little more. The costs, underneath it says that they do include typical numbers of signals and typical numbers of turn lanes, and they do include construction and design costs. The big thing they don't include is right-of-way. Right-of-way is sort of a separate deal, and we're not including those in the impact fees. Those are typically another deal where you require a dedication if necessary. But we did not include right-of-way because it's so variable, and it didn't include major utilities because, again, it's so variable. Some roads don't need any, and some roads need very expensive. So, where did we end up with identifying all the roadway needs? This map shows the roadway needs that have been identified to accommodate the 2040 traffic levels. The goldish color are paving of existing gravel roads. The purple are new roads. Those are the same as the dashed lines in the functional classification map. Extending crossroads to the east, some sections of County Road 70, 72, and Westgate Drive on the west side of town. The blue is improve a 2-lane roadway. There's only one of those. It's on County Road 32A, and that is a road that was that the traffic in 2040 projection was very high for a rural section, but it didn't need 4 lanes, so we said upgrade as a 2-lane. And then all of the greens are widening from 2 to 4 lanes. So those are all the roads that the 2040 volume was in excess of that capacity number for that road as a 2-lane. And when we apply the costs and the mileage, this table shows all of those costs. So paving 5 different projects for a total of 5.4 miles, and the cost would be about $13 million. Upgrade to urban, 2 projects, it's 2 pieces of 32A, 2.2 miles, $2.75 million. The big ticket items are widened to 4 lanes, which there are a lot of, a total of 29 projects, 10 of which are on state highways. And these projects, we use different segments that tend to be like 1 or 2 mile segments, just to kind of keep track, because the forecasts are different. So 12 miles of state highway, 20 miles of county road widening, and $89 million worth of costs. So that's where the bulk of the costs lie. And then the new roads, $32 million, for a total of $137 million of costs identified. For reference, in the previous plan, the cost was $96 or $97 million. Also for reference, the unit costs tend to be up in the 40 to 60% range from what they were 10 years ago. So 40 to 60% increase. The road costs are actually in the again, it used to be I think 96, now 137. So that's a little less than 40%, or about a 40% increase. There's actually a fewer miles of roads because there are less new projects needs identified than there were projects that have been done already. That have been, in the last 10 years, there have been a lot of projects that have been completed. So, so the total amount of projects needed is a tad less than it was last time, but those unit costs have inflated for 10 years. So the bottom line is 137. Okay. Yeah, we can go right into the impact fee part, and then come back for questions on the planning part or the impact fee part. I copied just a few of the slides from our January kind of intro to road impact fees, and I know a lot of you, or some of you, have been steeped in it for a while, and others it might be a little bit new. But road impact fees were instituted by the town in 2001 initially. And the intent is that each developer is charged their proportionate share of increasing road capacity of the road system to serve that development. So advantages of road impact fees, as opposed to, like before road impact fees, you do a kind of case-by-case, an exaction, I guess you'd call it, with a developer on what roads do you need to make your development work. And the advantages of doing a road impact fee, where it's calculated based on the demand that you're creating, is predictability. You know what the current fee is per dwelling unit, per 1,000 square feet of retail, whatever. So it's predictable, it's not subject to negotiation. It's equitable in the sense that some developments have a lot of road to build to get access to their development. They might build, 3 miles of pave a gravel road to get to a development, and then the next developer across the street comes in and their roads are done. So what do they have to do? They have very little. So it's equitable in the sense of kind of the predictability of kind of the order of development, and flexibility in the sense that the town starts to develop a fund, and the town planners and you can decide on what are the priorities. When you have a couple $1 million saved up, what's the priority to spend that money on to have a sort of orderly development of the system. First instituted in 2001, updated in 2007, and then as a lot of communities haven't updated them for a long time because there was a pause in development during the recession. So, so some years went by, and so now 10 years later, updating it. This is a diagram that's, staff was asking for an illustration that they could use kind of in talking to developers on, okay, what's your cost, what's impact fee eligible, what can you get reimbursed for versus what's your own cost. And it's just an illustration where the brown are examples of pieces of a road that are not impact fee eligible. They're not considered on the major street system, but they are the developer's own costs. So for example, the local street, which might continue up, that is on the developer to build a local street that's needed to serve that development. Minor collector, same thing. The left turn lane to get into the local street, the only reason for that left turn lane, it's not to serve the major street, it's to serve access to the local street. So that would be the developer's own cost. Right turn lane in, same thing. So kind of a simplistic diagram just to show kind of what's major street system and what's not. Again, projects that are not eligible. Example projects types that are eligible: new roads that are going to be major roads, paving of, again, major collectors and arterials, widening, and major intersections, so intersections of major and major streets. Not eligible, interior development streets, individual development accesses, and projects that address only existing safety problems. So by charging a developer, you're charging for the new capacity of the system that's needed to serve that new development. You can't charge a developer to kind of solve sins of the past. So if there was a safety problem, if there's a kind of existing geometric deficiency, you can't charge new development for that. And maintenance, it's a capital fee, it's not a maintenance fee. Factors that are considered in calculating the fees, it's the new trip generation for a development. So a development might have 100 new homes. There's national data on the average number of trips generated by a new house, about 9.6 trips. That's divided in half to avoid double counting, because the same trip that comes from a house might be going to a store, and you can't charge on both sides of the trip, because then you're charging twice for the trip. So you kind of divide it in half. We take the trip length. The model is pretty good at telling us what's the average length of a trip to go commuting trip or a trip to shopping, what have you. So the average length of a trip on the major street system in the town. And then the cost of all the improvements, and then per mile that a development puts on the system, a mile of travel that's created by that development, that has a share of the cost of all the improvements put together. There's of the $137 million, there's an average cost to generate 100 homes times 4 trips times 4. I made that too difficult for myself. 1,600 vehicle miles. There's an average dollar cost of accommodating a new vehicle mile of travel. So you multiply that. And we get to the bottom line. 2 sets of numbers here. There are a lot of numbers here, but on the right side is non-state roads. What Windsor has done, both of the previous impact fees and the current system includes state highways. So if there are needs on state highways, not that Windsor would necessarily pay for all of it, but Windsor might contribute along with Norfolk Range and CDOT to a project. So in the past, you've said, and we got this direction at our kickoff meeting, that you're presuming you would like to include state highways. So that total system set of columns is related to the total system, including state highways. Although our direction was to include state highways like you've done in the past, staff asked us to include the non-state roads, if you were to take them out, what the fees would be, just for information. So, so look more at the first 4 columns than the right side. For a single-family detached house, the current fee is $21.64. In 2008, the board did not adopt 100% of what the numbers said you could adopt. I think it was 85%, if I remember correctly. So the maximum fee calculated at that time in the 2008 study was $25.20, but $21.64 was the adopted rate, and it is the rate you're charging now. The updated fee is $39.72, so it's about 58% more than the maximum. So again, this is the maximum fee that our math, which is we're still tweaking a little bit, but it's order of magnitude. The 3972 or 58% increase from the maximum is what you could support, what you'd have the justification to support for the fee increase. Yeah,
The maximum fee is based on number of trips per day and the average cost per trip?
exactly.
Okay, just
Right,
wanna make sure I
right.
understand.
Exactly.
And the updated fee is the new max fee allowed.
The updated fee is the new max, right? And then the change from max is, in the case of single family, it's 3972 divided by 2520. So it's the new max versus the old max. So that's increased 58%. And you'll see different percentage increases for 1,000 square feet of commercial and office. The one question you might ask is why aren't the percent increases the same if it's kind of the same land use, and why isn't it more uniform? Why is, for example, mobile home park down? There are some differences in the categories. There's kind of a movement in the impact fee world to consolidate categories. You'll see in the previous plan and the one before that, it was even more complex. There was a different number, for example, for a small retail shopping center less than 50,000 square feet, I think it was, and shopping center 50 to 100 and 100. There were different commercial rates for big box versus furniture store versus convenience store, all these different categories. The movement nowadays is to consolidate and simplify. Number one, so there's now just a retail commercial, one per 1,000 square feet of retail commercial. The reason for simplifying is because development comes in, you build a 5,000 square foot store, you build it right around the corner from me in Denver. There used to be a service station that turned into a coffee shop. And as a service station, it had very low trip generation, so they paid a very small fee, many, many years ago. Denver doesn't have a fee, but they would pay a very small fee, and then becomes a coffee shop, and it has 20 times as much trip generation, but you can't change them. You can't recharge them because they've already got their building permit. They've already, and so that's the reason to make it more consistent is because kind of you attach the fee to the building, and then when the use changes over time, it's a little more consistent way to look at it. Okay. Yeah.
Just to clarify, if the board's looking at the materials that went out in the packet, and you're presenting some updated information, I just wanted to, if they're looking for the same numbers that are in your presentation, they're looking at the packet materials, so
Yeah, it is different.
the numbers, the Elliott's
Yeah.
are going to be a little bit different because they were
Right.
updated since the packet.
Got it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So which one is the accurate one? The one that he's
The
showing
one
now?
on the screen is new, and the packet that you were handed today with the maps, that is new. So that's everything that is happening today is new. What you sent out, the PowerPoint
Yeah.
in the packet has been tweaked.
The PowerPoint that went out last week is now being updated with this.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification.
Going
Okay.
back a screen, what was the asterisk on the public and institutional?
That is a good question. don't know the answer to that. Clancy, can you hear us by any chance?
Clancy?
Sorry, I had you on mute. Yeah,
Yeah. Can you hear me?
yeah.
Oh, nice. Do you happen to know on the updated potential fees, there is a asterisk after public/institutional on just the label for that category? I don't know if I did a typo and put it in there by mistake, or if you had it in there. Does that ring a bell?
I mean, do you have like a table number or something that goes with that? What is the table? The fee schedule, not the fee
It's
schedule.
slide 18 on the PowerPoint, if you have that.
Oh, hold on, I'll find it.
Yeah, could you take a look, and then Shay, maybe you could email back and forth, and let's move on, and we'll come back to that. The stumper of the day.
It probably, I'm not finding it right this second, but it's probably noting that the public institutional trip generation rate is, or no, is this a comparative, this is the comparative to the current fees?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Well, that would be just referencing that there's not an exact match on the current fees. And so,
oh, okay, that makes sense,
I mean,
yeah.
so we use actually the nursing home rate for public institutional. That's what that note is.
Okay, gotcha, so it's not quite an apples to apples from last time. Okay.
Right.
Shall we ask questions before you go on to another chart?
We could, or actually, I'm on the very last slide now, so, yeah, so I'll finish this one and then we can move forward. In your deliberations on what you want to do as far as enacting all these increases or enacting them over time, a key piece of information is what are your neighbors charging? And so this table shows, first row is the existing Windsor fees. The second row is the maximum that we're showing you that is supportable. Again, I'm gonna try to ask for some latitude that we do expect some minor tweaks to this as we do some further review, but those are kind of the ballparks. And then Fort Collins, Greeley, Loveland, Evans, Weld County, and Larimer County. Kind of all your major neighbors have current impact fees. Some of them are fairly different. Like for example, Weld County you'll see is one of the lower ones. Weld County is not kind of a system, but it targets, I don't even know, I think like 7 or 8 major roads, Weld County, so it's not as kind of widespread a fee, it's more of a targeted on a couple of regional roads. So they all kind of differ in some respects, but kind of gives you a sense of where these maximum future fee levels compared to your neighbors. So with that, yeah, I'll open it to questions and.
So I think he's at the point of questions.
All right, well, now I have another one from that last chart, but let's go back 2
Okay.
charts, can we?
So this one?
Right. Probably is a reason, but why is the updated amount for the multifamily and the mobile home park so much less than just the single family? And I asked the question because I live in a multifamily. I probably make as many trips out of that multifamily home as any homeowner in the, city or town. And I just wonder, and then mobile home probably can understand that a little bit more, but I really can't because they make the same amount of trips out of those homes. And can you explain that?
Yeah, let me try to punt that to Clancy again. Did you hear the question?
No.
Question was, why is multifamily so much less than single family when it seems like multifamily might generate kind of similar number of trips, and then why is mobile home park so much lower?
Why is mobile, well, I didn't realize mobile home park was on the comparison, but,
Well, and I'm sorry, we're the comparison is from previous to current, but I think a board member is more comparing just in the updated fee. Single family is $39.72, whereas multifamily $25.21. So multifamily is quite a bit less, and then mobile park is $11.96. So mobile park is less than a third of single family. So kind of why the relationship there.
Those fees are going down more. I mean, in the last study we did 10 years ago or whatever it was, we used just a standard trip length for all land uses. And in this update, we're using different trip lengths by type of dwelling. And so not only, the trip generation rates didn't really change between the two studies, but we're using better data from the National Household Travel Survey that shows that multifamily also generates shorter trips. And same for mobile homes, mobile home parks.
Well, Clancy, I would question that from this standpoint. In a mobile home, there are probably 2 drivers. In a multi-family home, there might be 2 or 3 or 4, almost as many drivers that are going out on the roads, using the roads the same amount of time and same amount of distance, maybe even more because they're traveling, they're going to jobs, most of them, and so I just question it because, and I'm one of those multi-family home drivers, and I would not complain about if mine were the same, but I'm alone in that, I'm sure. But I'm just questioning it.
Clancy, is an easy answer to that single-family homes generally have more vehicles associated with them and probably larger family size, that it's gonna tend to generate more trips, maybe just based on the number of vehicles and occupants?
Yeah, I think those are some reasons it could be different. I mean, we're looking at national data, just as we do with trip generation rates. I'm not sure, intuitively, it does not seem like, a mobile home would generate as many trips as a single-family unit, or even a multifamily. Well, multifamily units clearly have fewer people and probably fewer vehicles, and tend to be in more dense areas where they might likely have shorter trips. So the mobile home data might be a little more iffy, but I think it makes a lot of sense for multifamily.
Well, and mobile home data, we don't even have.
This mobile home fee just applies to mobile home parks, so a mobile home,
We
I
don't even
believe
need to
your
really
ordinance, the
discuss
way your
mobile
ordinance
home.
works, a mobile home outside a mobile home park is
Yeah.
a single-family unit.
Yeah, Clancy, we're hearing that Windsor doesn't have mobile homes, so that part is moot. So
We
it's
don't even allow them.
more the
Right.
multi-single. Okay.
But the same question about the significant difference between single-family and multifamily, that is our issue. And I'm guessing like maybe Scott's correct in that single-family would just seem logical, but they may have more drivers. And I'm also thinking about the location within the community, and I don't know how you
Well, isn't
factor
that
in
per
that.
dwelling though
Yeah,
too?
it's based
Because
on
on the
the
same, on
block.
a same lot that you might have a single-family home, you
Yeah.
might have 2 to 3 multifamily, and if that's per, is that per unit?
Yeah.
You'd actually be
Oh.
taxing that unit 3 times or 2 times as much on a standard lot as you would a single family, if you, I mean,
Right.
in
Like-
comparison, so
Right.
that's, I mean, if
Right.
it's per unit, then you are getting,
have
you
more
are
units
paying
on the
more,
same
because you have
space.
more units technically on the
correct.
same space than you do
Right,
in
right.
single
So-
family, I would guess.
So like, for example, if a house is divided into 2 duplex units, same exact square footage, then the fee would go up from $39.72 to $25.21 times 2 to $5,000.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's not twice as much.
So I do have a question about the oil and gas well category, in that you mentioned that the impact fees can't be used to address maintenance issues. But I guess in my mind, I think about the excessive wear and tear that oil field traffic causes on roads. Is that something that's kind of outside the normal scope of maintenance, where those impact fees from oil and gas can be used to repair those roads damaged by oil and gas?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great question in the sense that I have a good answer for it. And it's also a good question, because we've done a lot of specific impact fee work for oil and gas for a couple of counties and cities around town. Oil and gas is really different from everything else in a couple of respects. One, it's few but really heavy vehicles that do a lot of damage. It's different in that the impact is before the use. The impact is drilling the wells and getting the trucks in, the equipment in. Once you've drilled it and then you're actually producing, then it's only a couple of trips in and out. So it's just weird in that sense. As opposed to a house, there's a few construction vehicles to build a house, but then once it's built, it's generating trips over time. So we've done, several counties and cities have asked for specific studies to look at the wear and tear, and you can look at the maintenance, and it's kind of capacity, but like not capacity as in widening, but capacity as in the structure of the road. Can the road handle it? This fee is just based on, it ignores the fact that that trucks do more damage than vehicles. It's kind of a quick and dirty, get something in place based on just number of vehicles, not the weight factor, and the production, like kind of 2 trucks in and out per day while the well is going on. So this was not intended to be a very kind of robust fee. You could do that. Others have looked at that, and a study that takes into consideration the wear and tear and the wear and tear in developing the well and drilling the well, and it could be much higher.
Yeah, the oil and gas road impact fee is the most current, or the most recently added fee about, I believe, 3 years ago. It was added, and the town board and staff weighed all of the different options, and this was, as Elliot called it, more of the simplified or quick and dirty fee, as opposed to going into the detailed, complicated study that would have been required for a different oil and gas fee.
It was the board's first stab at trying to at least get some kind of dollar out of that industry that is creating some additional impacts to our roads. So that was our first opportunity to try to recapture some of that.
So from a financial standpoint, does it become a situation where that money goes into this pocket, which can only be used for road upgrades, But meanwhile, because we've got more money in that pocket, we can use extra money from this pocket to repair those roads damaged by them? Is that,
All this money is going in the same pocket, and it's all for capacity, so we wouldn't be able to use any of it for maintenance.
right, but I'm saying, because we've got additional money going into that pocket, less from the general fund is needed for some of those capacity projects, which then frees up more from the general fund for maintenance issues? Is that,
I think that's
Logic
I think
follow?
that's I think that's
Okay.
a fair assessment.
So, and this information this evening is just for informational purposes? We're not, are you looking for us, I mean, and for us to start thinking about maybe where we want to go with the increased fee? Or
Yeah,
is that gonna be something that we'll be seeing? Okay.
yeah, these are the first stab at the fees, and I guess we are looking for some direction as to whether or not you feel as though they're in line with what you had in mind as far as our place in the region, and also from to begin thinking about implementation and whether or not what level you want to implement, and at what, is it an incremental
Okay.
implementation? Those are
We
the
have
kind of things.
typically, I think, done incremental, but not with road impact fees, but with some of our other fees. Can you put it back on how we compare to regional, and then I know Mr. Baker has a question. Mr. Baker?
Oh, you ready?
Yep.
You said a previous board chose to do 85% of the max. Could we cherry pick and say 85% on this one and 100% of the max on this one, or do we need to be consistent?
Clancy, did you hear that question?
Yeah, you need to be consistent. It needs to be applied uniformly
Okay.
across the land uses.
For the equity piece.
Yeah, so keep it proportional to impact, yes.
Okay. And then for our staff, do we charge a new impact fee if the use changes? He mentioned the coffee shop in Denver. Do we?
We actually amended the code
Look back.
to eliminate the
That's what I
look-back
thought.
period, to simplify things. So we charge with new construction and additions over a certain square footage, but we don't go back and adjust for change in use anymore.
Okay, Cindy?
do we have the same kind of comparison data for Timnath and Severance as well?
We could get that. Do you know if they, Severance and Timnath, do you know that they have impact fees?
I
can't-
don't, I just was thinking
I
of
can't
our
remember.
adjoining neighbors.
We can expand, well, we could look at other communities.
Okay.
And
Mr. Brennan?
Couple things. One, I'm just doing some quick math here, just as an example. Single family detached, from current to updated maximum is $1,800 increase, 80% increase. I'm anxious to hear from the stakeholders about how they would respond to that. I mean, on the one hand, I can see 80% sounds like a big increase, and that's just one category. But a home builder, developer would probably just pass it on to the purchaser, which part of my question would be, is that enough to impact our affordable housing issues in Windsor or not? I don't know, so that's kind of on my mind. But then the other thing deals with staff and everybody, implementation. At some point, I'd like to know how it's possible to implement in increments.
Okay. Hyder?
Well, I would like to go back to the last chart again, and will you explain the difference between the Will County and Larimer County, and why there was such a difference there?
A bunch of things, but, and I'm not an expert in either one of those two, but I know a few differences. Weld County's is, it's not sort of a comprehensive system-wide fee. but they have identified, again, I'm thinking it's a number like 6 or 7 or 8 specific roads of sort of countywide significance that they're looking for. So it's so when you look at the average trip length of a trip from a house, it's the trip length on just 8 specific roads. So that there's a much lower, kind of lower impact that they're looking at. Larimer County is more of a system-wide, kind of like yours. Let's see. Larimer County is says parentheses recommended 2018. So they're like a few months ahead of you, but they have not enacted this yet. So it's not certain that they will, in fact, go as high as what those numbers are. So a lot of differences.
Scott, just, year ago, they didn't have impact fees, right?
I believe they did.
Did they? They've always identified a limited number of roads, Ivan, well as in called strategic roads. They're the only roads they address and identify. So it's much smaller.
Okay. Are there any other questions? It looks like some of our planning commission folks have some questions. Is it all right to let them ask questions?
No, it's supposed to be
I have another map.
it has to be. No, just ask the
That's the question of me. I know as a city, we're trying to attract industrial uses. Is it really, do we really want to be that far out of line with our surrounding communities in our impact fee for industrial sites? I don't know how much of a disincentive that is to a developer, anybody in the impact fees, if it makes a large part of their decision. If it does, I think, we really want to be in line, because we made a couple of them, but a lot of them stuff that's stolen from us, and I think that would be, this would be more of possibly doing that in the future.
Okay, Mr. Bennett, and then Mr. Arnold has a question.
I have another math question, and, understanding the numbers are flexible here, but this plan for road improvements is based on the next 25 years. Looking at the proposed fees, $137 million over the next 25 years, theoretically. That's about $5.8 million per year. How close, if we went with a maximum, do we have any idea how close that would get us to $5 or $6 million a year?
We have not done that math yet, but that is math that we will do. Clancy, you have not, you haven't estimated the annual revenue from this rate yet, I don't think, have you?
I didn't get your question, sorry.
Have you, I don't believe you've estimated the amount of revenue that the town would get based on our growth projections with these maximum fees, have you?
No.
Okay, yeah.
No.
We'll bring that back next time.
Okay?
One quick one.
Okay.
I assume those 2017 dollars.
Yes. Yes. 2016, actually. CDOT data from
We
2016.
have an escalator, an escalator, or just wait every 5 years?
We actually, the code requires us to update annually based on construction cost index that CDOT puts out.
Okay, Mr. Arnold, did you have some questions you wanted to ask?
Can you bring up the functional classification in that? So part of what you'll do at the end of August, for the schedule to adopt this, accept it, or whatever we end up doing. And as you're thinking about this over the next month, just the one I wanted, I think so. I want you to think about this one item that you had a letter from Country Farms. So they have asked you not to have this on your map.
The yellow one, the yellow
That
dot?
little piece that's not built there. Remember, that goes back from the Westgate days, discussion of the car dealerships. Right now, it dead ends in there. It was always intended to go through and be used as a connector into Westgate. But they have asked you to not include it on this map and take it off. If it stays on the map, it would be our intent, all obviously through development and such, to continue to be a street classified as a something
Minor collector.
collector.
Minor collector.
There are options you can do there we can talk about down the line, but I did want to remind you that they have made a request to not have that included on this map. Take it off.
So the stakeholders are gonna see the same presentation you said on the
29th.
27th or 29th?
Yeah, so the stakeholders is primarily the development community, builders, home builders association. And then we were also planning to get back to the Country Farms HOA during the same period of time, so that we'd have input from both of those groups for your next work
And then you
session.
would give us whatever came out of those
Right.
particular, whatever the comments are for
Right.
those particular, okay.
And as Kelly mentioned, I was gonna bring that up, that staff and the consultant have been discussing that particular road, and our initial recommendation would be to leave it on the map, but possibly downgrade it from the, I believe it's currently a major collector on the existing
Yeah,
It looked
well,
like
it's
a
currently
minor.
collector. We don't have the
collector gen,
distinction,
so, right.
we'll put it as a minor.
So it would be a minor collector instead of a major, or rather than a major.
Is there any additional direction or instruction we want to have them consider before we see this again? Mr. Baker?
Well, maybe not before we see it, but if we, I'd like to maybe see a projection, if you're gonna propose 100% of the max or 85, maybe you give us a few options. I'd like to see what we're gonna lose by using those lower options. And what the impact of that is over the next 25 years. Cause it sounds like it would just compound as you. Also, in regards to the industrial rate, based on a previous comment, I don't think we can charge a different rate for industrial, and then we have to be uniform and equitable, so.
I think there is a fair question there, though. If you do raise your rates to a certain rate, there's a good possibility that you may deter certain forms of development, which will then lower your return on a higher rate.
Well, that same issue, it brought up a question for me, because as I look at like the rate for office to industrial versus the difference in that rate for, say, Loveland or Fort Collins, why is there a much bigger gap for those categories with other entities? I mean, is their max based off different data?
It is, and that's one of the things that I made a note that I want to do some more research. We've not done research on what trip generation rates others have used and things like that. Let me make a little comment specifically about the industrial one, because it was something that we've been talking about internally over the last week or so, quite a bit. And there are, we all use kind of the same Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual. That's a national, kind of the Bible of trip generation. They do a million studies, and it's like a 3-volume book with all kinds of different rates. And it's not always obvious what rate to use. And we've been looking at the industrial. There's a category called industrial park. There's a category called manufacturing. There's another. There's a heavy industrial. There's a couple of different categories. Where with that number, that 2916 number came from a blended rate halfway in between the manufacturing and the industrial. And we've used different ones, and we've been playing with different ones, and it's, we've made a note that we want to do some more research and see what others are using. And there might be a very, you know, a sort of clear by the book way to get more into the mainstream there. So-
Yeah, the original number that came back with the first draft of the study was much higher than what the blended number was looking like, and staff had the same concerns and wanted to see what the blended number, if it would bring it to be more of a competitive with our neighbor type numbers. So that is something that, as Elliot said, could still be looked at. And I also wanted to point out, it kind of goes back to the asterisk question. These uses are also somewhat simplified and more generic than our current table. Our current table gets into specific sit-down restaurants, fast food restaurants, convenience stores, and those types of things. And inevitably with that specific table, we were always having uses that came in that didn't quite fit one category or the other. So staff specifically asked the consultant to, and it sounded like this is a trend that a lot of communities are going with more generic uses in their tables, so that we aren't having to farm out special studies to determine this per specific use, what the fee would be. So I guess I just wanted to point that out, that this table is a little bit more simplified than our existing table as well.
And let me just point out, on the other, that's true. On the other hand, also, the existing ordinance and many ordinances have like a sort of a protest, or there's a appeal is the word I'm looking for, an appeal process where, like an example is a age-restricted senior community, you know, large age-restricted senior community where there's a lot of data that says, no, they're not going to generate as many trips per unit as a typical mixed community. So there is the ability to do sort of an appeal process. So, and we could put that in the ordinance again if you decide to do that.
Are these fees eligible for when they're looking at this with our economic development director? Are these fees eligible to be waived?
No, we're supposed to keep the road impact
These fees
fee whole.
are to be, okay,
Right.
okay.
That was part of my question, because I appreciate the comments about the competitive nature of Windsor with other communities on the industrial fee. And I was hoping that we would hear from staff about how big an issue is that when we are trying to compete for businesses with other communities. And also, how do you factor in other incentives or other fees that we might be waiving with industrial operations? So it's kind of a complex question or issue there.
Well, I don't think, so I don't think we have an answer yet tonight. 'Cause,
Right.
As Scott said, we saw these last week for the first time too, and kind of went, same reaction that you're having. So I appreciate the fact that Clancy's going to continue looking. I appreciate the fact that you're asking how the other communities get to where they are. And I don't think we have an answer yet, but in light of that, no matter what the fee is, you still have tools in your chest to use to offset road impact fee costs. So even if it's $1,000, you still want to try and do that a different way on a different method to get up to a better incentive. You typically try not to keep this fee, we've always maintained keep this fund intact and this fee intact. But use your other tools that you have to get to a reasonable incentive to get to what you think might be a reasonable fee associated with all those other incentives. But yeah, we were little surprised by how high it is, and we have all the shared concerns you're voicing tonight. And so I think there's still some more work to be had. I don't know what the results of that is, and if it's the same.
So will we see something again before it's actually
Yeah.
placed back on our agenda for a decision?
Yes, there's another one more, there's another, in July 17th, you'll have
Okay.
another go at this. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fee comparison, as we're looking at it right now, is still somewhat comparable with our neighboring communities, and that, we do look at that, so that we aren't the highest in the region,
Right.
that we fall somewhere in the,
In the middle?
right.
I think that was the direction the board, when we looked at this last time. We didn't wanna be the highest, but not necessarily the lowest, but somewhere.
And I quite frankly think it's because we have a significant amount of industrial space to compare with. So there's that, I think, that enters into this a little bit, so, but we're still working on it.
Okay, so we do have two other items, but are we ready to move to the next items? We do have some folks from the planning commission. Anybody else have any other questions? Any other board member questions?
I still have a question, back to the roadway, and it won't affect me at all, but have we looked at the possibility of Eastman Parkway going all the way to the west to County Road 30 and connecting there? I know there's a river, and I know there's a hill, but and it's gonna cost money, but right now, the only east-west thoroughfare we have is 392, which is a mess, and New Liberty Road. And I'm just wondering, and I'm not asking for an answer now, but I've said it before in meetings, and have we looked at that as a possibility? It's a road coming all the way from the east, and it could go all the way to County Road 30 and connect.
I think that's why we've prioritized Crossroads Boulevard, because it's a more feasible route than County Road 30.
But that's too far, well, that's too far south in my estimation. And I'm thinking, and I've said it before, I'm thinking about watching the town of Longmont, Colorado, how it grew from 12,000 to 112,000. And I'm just concerned about when we go to 50 or 60,000, we're not gonna have enough thoroughfare east and west. So I just wanted to know if we had looked at it. And I don't think Crossroads, it'll handle the south population, but not the downtown, where I live. It's not gonna handle that. I won't go anymore. That's my feeling, and I've said it for the last 4 years, and
And to jive live as Scott also, this board has talked to CDOT about 19. I think it'd be interesting to see what it would take to classify that to major arterial. So in case there's interest in doing a swap at some time with CDOT or 392. So 19 up to somewhere, or 72 or something, just so that would be a comparable state highway system road. What would that cost? Change that to red over time. So Ivan, you're saying, and we can get you a better response today, but you're saying draw a line from east to west into Eastman Park into 13, and let us give you a response on that.
well,
So
yeah.
that's fine, we'll talk about that. And then I'd like to look at a red, with something on 19 north on Main Street up to probably 72.
But Kelly, I think you're saying County Road 13, I'm saying clear over to County Road 30.
He's saying up the hill.
Straight through. And that's why I said there's a hill there, I realize, but there's a hill on 392 too. And there's a hill on Crossroads, so we're in a valley, so we're gonna have to live with that, and it's gonna cost money. And it's just a feeling that I've had ever since we first discussed this, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Since Ivan brought it up, what about Jacoby Road or 32E? It seems like that needs to be upgraded, but
So
the projections didn't seem,
it's a major collector now. Right, 33.
oh, is it?
It's upgraded over here.
Or it was
Improved
plus
too.
on it.
It's listed B.
32E is one where our forecasts were, it's now a rural collector, and the forecasts were a little bit beyond rural collector, but they weren't at the 4-lane level. So our recommendation was to improve it as a 2-lane to a more urban, better
Like curb and gutter?
turn lanes, curb and gutter, and, yeah.
Okay.
What is the reason for the gaps on 392 being some of it 2 lanes, some of it 4 lanes? As far as the recommendations to upgrade parts of it to 4 lanes, but not other parts of it?
Yeah, based on, our recommendation is to complete the 4-laning. It's now kind of patchwork, so it would be completed with the exception of downtown, which, you've already studied and discussed in the past.
Well, not downtown, but like,
Out west, I think.
it's, it's currently 4 lanes from, 7th Street, well, even 257, out to about 17th Street, but it drops to 1 lane before County Road 13. So is that just how it's reflected on the map? Like, the ideal is it would actually be 4 lanes all the way?
Yeah, if there's another gap that we missed, that was unintentional, but the
Okay,
the
so it's a
intention was to
distillation.
widen everything to 4 lanes with the exception of downtown.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we'll double check that we got all the segments right.
Looking at map 3 and map 5, they're the same title, but they're different. You look on map 3, it shows 257 from the north boundary to the south boundary being 4 lanes. If you look at map 5, it only goes from 74 down to the.
Yeah, map 5 was included as a comparison. 4 and 5 are maps that we have existing today. And so those were in there for comparison to the new maps.
Okay, so the 3 is the latest projection.
Correct. 3 is new, 4 and 5 are existing.
Okay. Anything further before we move on to our second item? Oh. What was that?
Clancy.
Okay. Item 2, proposed revisions
Say goodbye.
to roadway cross sections. Mr. Hornbeck, you're gonna lead that discussion?
We're gonna hang up, Clancy.
Good night, Clancy.
That sounded like a healing. So like the exorcist.
Town hall is fine.
Keeps us entertained.
So thanks to the presentation from Elliot and Clancy and their team, they gave us a good overview of kind of what the future needs of Windsor are and how we might go about paying for it. So I'm going to get into more of what those roads actually look like. So currently, our design of roadways is based primarily upon 2 documents. This map that you've been looking at, the roadway improvement document, as well as the design criteria and construction specifications. So this document tells us what type of road, this document tells us how that road is going to be built. And existing cross sections get into standards such as number of lanes, turn lanes, medians, provision of bike lanes, things like that. And so, in conjunction with the previous effort, and the presentation that's going to follow mine, we've also been working on some changes to the cross sections of streets. And there's 3 primary goals associated with this effort. One is to improve the pedestrian and bicyclist accommodation. Number 2 is to enhance the community image. And number 3 is for greater consistency with neighboring jurisdictions. So getting into some of those specifics, You'll recall that Town Board adopted a Complete Streets Guide in April of this year. And that guide promotes safe, convenient transportation for all modes of travel, including vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. And staff has identified a few different areas where pedestrians or bicycles could be better accommodated. So one such item would be the wider medians that can accommodate a pedestrian refuge. So the pedestrian refuge seen here is, it's an area within a raised median where pedestrians can pause to cross a street. And it makes it easier for crossing, particularly on wide streets or high volume, high speed roadways, because they only need to cross one direction of traffic at a time. Another improvement is the wider sidewalks. Code consultant Gould Evans has identified a 5-foot sidewalk as the minimum that's needed for 2 people to comfortably walk side by side. So we currently have some 4-foot sidewalks, so we're proposing to increase those to 5. And then on busier arterial streets, we currently have a 5-foot standard, and proposed is to increase that to 6 to, again, just add a little more comfort for pedestrians on busier streets. Sidewalks on rural roads. Currently, our cross sections don't require sidewalks on roads like this, so you end up with just a shoulder or little or no accommodation for folks in these areas. And this is problematic because pedestrians still may desire or may need to walk in these areas. And most rural areas will eventually be more built out and connected to existing and future sidewalk networks. So it's important to get those improvements in place when we have the chance with new development. Another amenity that is more comfortable and safer for pedestrians is a detached sidewalk. So rather than right up to the curb next to streets, something like this on Water Valley Parkway. It's currently a standard that we have on arterial streets and major collectors. We would propose adding this to minor collectors and also making it an option on local streets. So if a developer wants to do an enhanced roadway, that's an option available to them. Another element we've talked about in the past is just the enhanced community image that can be provided through landscaping, through medians, things of that nature. So the comp plan outlines the importance of community image to Windsor residents, who we know that they value the small town feel of Windsor and the attractive nature of the community. And the roadway network is actually the largest asset that the town controls, and it's the area where the town has the greatest ability to impact the image of the community. So creating streets with landscape medians as gateways on important corridors, entryways into town is an option that we'd like to pursue. And staff has preliminarily identified a few different corridors. So for example, 392 coming into town off I-25, County Road 5, or Fairgrounds, the Harmony Road section that's within Windsor, 257 north and south coming into town, as well as 392 out on the east side of town. And if you have any feedback on those, we can get into that as this effort continues. Those are just some of the roadways that we identified as probably priority corridors that are gateways. Another reason for these proposed changes are just for consistency with neighboring jurisdictions. The existing standards were based partially on the Larimer County Urban Area Street Standards, also known as Lucas. And those standards have specific standards for Fort Collins and for Loveland. Our existing standards were also partially based on Greeley. These proposed changes would bring Windsor standards closer to those other communities in terms of a lot of the numbers. And on the screen is a 4-lane urban arterial as an example. We did this for every street type in comparison to the neighboring jurisdictions, and trying to be fairly consistent, which gives makes development easier for contractors, consultants, developers, and also for town staff in designing and constructing roadways. And it also, we can look at examples of these roadways that have been built in our neighboring jurisdictions and see how they have functioned. So an analysis of what impact this would have. The proposed street sections, in our opinion, would have a modest impact on development through additional requirements. Primarily would be the landscaped medians in some places. Sidewalks, whether they're attached or detached, would go or would become 1 foot wider in some sections. Others would remain the same. There'd be additional street trees in the parkway or between the sidewalk and the street. And there'd also be a requirement for the rural sidewalks. Those are the major impacts. And the impacts on the width of right-of-way. For an arterial, it would get 10 feet wider to accommodate these changes. Major collectors, depending on whether a median is necessary, would be either 10 feet narrower or 10 feet wider. Minor collector, 6 feet wider, but actually 2 feet less of pavement. So it's kind of a trade-off. And similar with local, they'd be getting a little narrower and have less pavement. And the cost comparisons for the actual construction and maintenance of landscape medians. So we looked, Josh looked at Timnath and what their cost was with their Harmony Road project, and when they put the medians in on that new section. So a paved or striped median would be about $1.3 million. What they experienced was about $1.4 million for a raised median with the landscaping. So it's about $115,000 extra for a quarter-mile section. So it, less than 10% increase for that landscape median. In terms of maintenance, we looked at the city of Greeley. They put together a comparison costs for maintaining different types of landscaping. So that's where these low, medium, and high numbers come from. Again, for a quarter mile section, and that's compared to a paved, just center turn lane. So comparison of those costs. And one option that could potentially offset some additional costs that the town might take on with more landscaping would be to consider prioritizing the gateway corridors and moving away from the non-gateway corridors where town forestry staff currently works on maintaining street trees and some of the older trees. That's a responsibility in most jurisdictions that falls on the adjacent property owner, similar to sidewalks. So that's an option we could explore of shifting resources to what we're maintaining. So next steps would be any input the town board has. We do have a stakeholder meeting scheduled for the 29th, and any modifications that we do end up making would come back before you for resolution and adoption. So with that, if there's any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Morgan?
So when it comes to the updates to the standards, are we looking back at current, talking about changing the 4-foot sidewalks to 5-foot sidewalks? That's something that we would actually go back and update those?
No, it'd be all for new construction.
For new construction, okay, gotcha. My next question was gonna be, okay, how much is that gonna cost?
Right.
Cause that seems like that'd be quite a costly production.
Any other questions, Cindy?
What is the source of the cost when it's just a paved and striped median being so high? So it just kind
Is
of
that
seems outside the
for-
scope of what you would expect, or at
Is
least
that
what I would
for
expect.
this maintenance cost?
Yeah.
So that's an annualized cost. So we took, our engineering department does a roadway, I'm forgetting the exact terminology, but it's a pavement management where they want to keep roadways at a certain level. So they figure different streets need to be treated with, as opposed to a mill and overlay, which is more expensive. They do a a seal coat every certain number of years. And they do have to do a mill and overlay every 15 years or whatever. So that 1,500 is an annualized cost over a 60-year lifespan.
So that's for the whole stretch of road, not just for the median?
That's just the median portion.
For a quarter mile.
For a quarter mile.
And the town is responsible for for these maintenance fees?
I mean,
Or
it's
does
not,
it depend on,
it's not a fee, it's not an exact number, it's just an estimate over a 60-year lifespan. You're putting this much into to that median portion.
But I guess that sounds like median that a vehicle is driving on, like
Correct.
a shared turn lane, whereas if we're talking about a landscaped median, there's still a turn lane that needs maintained just like there was before. So am I understanding right that this low landscaping would be in addition to the 1,500? Or is that encompassing the turn lane and the median landscaping maintenance?
There would be places where a turn lane isn't necessarily needed, where that could be replaced with a landscape median. And then there are places, you're correct, where there would be a narrower median, a 5 to 6 foot median, and a turn lane adjacent. I think it's unresolved whether that 5 foot strip would be landscaped or not.
Okay, that makes sense then.
Cost benefit of low landscape medians, other than the aesthetics, is there any way to quantify safety, community development, economic development?
To quantify it exactly, no. I mean, I think you can point to the value of an attractive roadway and streetscape builds value in a community. I don't know of any specific studies. In terms of safety, the median itself, it could be a paved median without landscaping, not as attractive, but could still achieve some of the safety.
what are the lifespan of these landscape mediums? I'm seeing communities all over going back in now and redoing them. And I know they weren't done that long ago. So it doesn't seem like they have a really long lifespan, but do you know?
Are you talking about the plant materials or the hardscape concrete?
Probably, just the stuff inside.
Stuff inside,
But I've seen them even have to go back in and redo because, after the facts,
yeah.
the hard materials as well.
So I haven't seen any examples of redoing the existing ones. What we're more familiar with is cities, Fort Collins and Greeley particularly, that have gone in and put the medians in after the fact on roadways that didn't have them. As far as the lifespan, I think we would work with forestry department and they've gotten to a point where they know which plant materials last, which can withstand the salts and those things. And there's also things that can be done in the design of the median if it's built up so it's more protected from those salts and just other wear and tear being adjacent to a roadway that extends the lifespan.
Okay. Would you have something to
I
add
was
to
just
that?
going to kind of reiterate what Paul was saying. I think we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions that are going in and retrofitting roads and putting them in where they didn't have them before. And so that's one of the reasons that we're proposing that we put it in, have that standard available, because it's more costly to go back and retrofit, say, some of the streets at Greeley or Fort Collins or installing new landscape medians. And I would just also echo that we specifically chose to use the Timnath Harmony Road example as a first step to talk to the board about this, because they are using xeric materials and low maintenance materials, and they're designing it in a way that it's less susceptible to damage from snow plows and things that trying to make it more durable for the long term.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Mr. Schick?
One of the things that I don't think we've had an opportunity to look at pedestrian and bicycle safety is on the roundabouts. Because a lot of times I see
address those type of, that roadway specifically as well, roundabouts?
This doesn't get into roundabouts
Okay.
as it is now.
I'll just make a comment, I'm not surprised that we can't quantify the value of low landscaped entryways to the community, but I do think there is a real value to a community in terms of its culture, the things that are more aesthetic. As you come into community, I think it does have a value to the overall community and atmosphere.
Now, is this gonna be presented next week as well, or only that first phase, or all of this packet also will be presented to stakeholders?
We'll present this to stakeholders as well.
Okay, so we'll see in July then, again, comments or updates or additional
Yes.
chance for. Okay. Anything else before we move on to our third item? Okay, our third item then, were you finished, Mr. Hardback?
I'm done, thank you.
Land use code update, transportation elements and discussion papers. This evening, Ms. King with a consultant from Gould Evans.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. Tonight, we are covering the land use code updates pertaining to the transportation element. So we started out taking the goals and objectives from the 2016 comprehensive plan as they pertain to community image and design, as well as connectivity and the feedback that was gathered during the comprehensive plan update feedback. That led to the topic papers that are included in your packet. Mr. Brewster is from Gould Evans, and he has been involved with interviewing developer stakeholders as well as the various departments that are directly involved with the Development Review Committee. And from there, I'll turn it over to him to give an update of where we are as the status for the land use code update, as well as what we've worked on so far and getting some of your feedback from the topic papers. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlin. Again, I'm Chris Brewster from Gould Evans. It's good to be here again. I was last here in February. So this is part of update, just a status update of where we're at on the development code, but also paralleling with the road impact fee studies and the street cross-section things that are going on. So just an overview of our overall scope and tasks is before you here, and then this next slide shows where we're at. So we're in what we call the discussion phase. So we haven't begun to draft what we think the solutions to making your development code match more closely your comprehensive plan. But we use some of the issue papers that I'm going to go into a little more detail to get people talking at a high level what direction we want to go on some of these. We've also begun the draft regulation framework, which is basically a glorified table of contents where we've have the organization of where the new code will be, and we're beginning to fit in the pieces from your existing code that we're going to keep, as well as working with some of the items we think are going to change. And again, most of those big picture items that are going to change are discussed in the issue papers. Just a quick recap of how we got here. In February, we talked about the plan conformance report, and this was really our independent assessment of where your development regulations either support or conflict with your comprehensive plan. And we went through section by section and rated the regulations against some of the key themes from your plan, and that's what's shown on the right there, and then produced an executive summary that's shown on the left there. From that, our leaping off point was, okay, we'll produce these issue papers, and we organize them under these main topics: community image and our public realm, which is the 3 papers we have completed to this date, and then development patterns and places, what private investment fits within there. And so that's really the standards that will apply to private property. We like to take the public realm issue first because it really sets the context for what makes sense and what doesn't make sense in terms of adjusting the development regulations. That's part of the reason, but another part of the reason is because, as you've heard before, your plan was pretty strong in some of the community image things, and so that's dealing with street networks, open spaces, whether they're public or common or even private. And so I'll go through each of those papers real briefly. If you haven't gotten a chance to read them, this will give you just the highlights. If you have gotten a chance to read them, maybe this spurs some questions. But the first one we did was connectivity, this street networks and open space systems, how they set the context for development. And what we found was that you have minimal connectivity standards. You have the only thing that requires connectivity is a maximum distance between adjacent streets of 1,500 feet. And that's really quite large. It may be appropriate in some places, but there's other places where you need a lot greater connectivity than is provided by that. Next bullet point down, and a lot of these have to do with subdivision regulations. I should back up. For the public realm standards are mainly coming from what your subdivision regulations are saying to these topics, not necessarily the zoning ordinance. There was not a lot of evidence of open space planning or coordination in the regulations. Before property kind of gets fractured and broken up, we'd like to try to link some of these systems that developers are, to the extent they are providing it, and they are, a lot of your developments have great open spaces, but to the extent they're providing it, they're doing it on their own initiative. So we'd like to make that a focal point of the subdivision regulations before land gets fractured, to think of how you can connect some of these systems, both internally through private and common spaces, but also to the public trail system and to parks, what Parks is planning as well. And then the last one, the street standards and layout are based purely on vehicle level of service, so there's a lack of multimodal considerations. Some of the pedestrian elements that Paul was talking about, and as well as some others that are identified in that paper of different types of street in different contexts aren't clearly identified in your regulations, either the subdivision standards or the design manual that Paul referenced. The next scale down talks about how do we create different types for different places. Your plan calls for lots of different contexts for future development, although they may have the same elements. There's different types of streets and different types of open spaces that go in depending on what context you're in. The easy way to explain it is the rural subdivisions on the south part of town versus downtown. Both have street networks, both have open spaces, but they're completely different, and they're trying to set a different public realm that's appropriate for that development context. And so your plan is really for planning for all those types of spaces in between as well, and so how do we draw a better connection to those standards? And then lastly, just designing at a specific site level, how do we design places? And what we're looking at here is really starting to focus on block by block different street types and what will make sense for private development standards. And another easy way to think of this is Main Street as it transitions coming into town. Uses far set off parking lots. As you get closer in, they're starting to, the block with the Taco Bell and those places on it starting to kind of bring things in tighter, and then a few blocks later you have everything right up on the street. So there's a similar lesson to be learned in different areas of your community of how we're relating private projects to the specific street types. And so we want to look at that in a little more detail as well. Each of these issue papers is organized on what does your comp plan say, what do your regulations say, so where is there a conflict, some options to consider, in other words, things that we think might work that we'd like to discuss. And then there's also additional resources at the back, which actually has links to both codes from this region or codes from out of the region that have addressed similar topics that you're trying to address here. So we have some examples of things we're going to try to be working with as we build the initial draft. Part of the papers, what we also did was we looked at study communities, and these are mainly, we picked projects that were trying to sort of break the status quo. So your plan is talking for two basic things. How can we have more walkable commercial centers, and how can we have a greater mix of housing types in certain neighborhoods? Certainly not everywhere, but there's going to be at least some places where you're planning for these types of contexts, where you're sort of bucking the status quo or what might ordinarily happen. And so these study communities were looked at for their relevance to Windsor. And what we did was we looked at the connectivity network of both the streets and open spaces to get a guide of how well connected they are or aren't. Then we went through and looked at the different types of streets and open spaces that they have within each of these places. And then down at the site level, how land uses relate to those spaces, and that will help instruct us on the actual development standards of where we want to make changes and know. So it went into a little bit more detail on a couple of them. The Rigdon Farms one in Fort Collins, we think that one is very applicable, largely because it's built on an arterial system, much like what was talked about for the road impact study. If you back up a minute to give you a sense of scale, this pattern that you see within here would be a small portion of what exists within that larger road network that you saw on the functional class map. So only the edge streets, if that, would register on that map. And so there's a lot greater network that's going on within these specific places if you're planning for a more walkable and integrated neighborhood. So what that does for open space in Rigdon Farms is there's everything from trail systems to private courtyards to public parks to small pocket parks. Not all of them public, obviously, and so coordinating those with what Parks is doing on the policy for taking on public parks and integrating them is what we're trying to do with the development code. But how do we plan for these types of spaces from a larger scale down to a specific development project? Similarly, with the street network, there's a wide variety of different street types in this project. The biggest one I would call attention to is this upper left one, which is they've used it to create a transition between the commercial property, which borders that arterial, to the neighborhoods that are immediately across the street. And so they used a very walkable street design with on-street parking. And so that would be one of the ones that we think is perhaps missing from the cross sections that Paul talked about that we need to look to adding in. And then just a wide variety of different neighborhood streets as well in that project. Another one of the four is Northgate Village, which is in our metropolitan area, Kansas City. It was a redevelopment project, but again, very similar context in that it's offset from a major regional arterial street, and when they shift off, this grid network creates better transitions for a greater mix of housing types and better relationship to the commercial development. So it's planned around a street network and open space system first and foremost, and then the land use and development patterns come in response to that. So everything from a large regional park to a trail system to small courtyards that are private or common areas as well. And then a similar story evolves on the street types. Although this project didn't have commercial streets, there was a wide range of residential street types depending on what types of development is going on within that. So the issue papers all talk about these types of topics and what does that mean for Windsor's future development code. So we've summarized it into a few major discussion topics as we go forward that we can either talk about tonight or just things to think about as we move on through the next couple months. The first one is how can we establish connectivity standards for different contexts? So that 1,500 number that was your maximum before you require connectivity, I did a little bit of math, and at the largest scale that would be about a 50-acre chunk of property that would result from that level of connectivity. Now obviously there's different streets and different roads that are going on because that's a maximum. But even at the lower end, what you're looking at is probably anywhere from 15 to 18 acre blocks that are being created by that project. Whereas when we go back to the study communities, the walkable centers are usually a rule of thumb is they're anywhere from 2 to 5 acre blocks in a typical walkable neighborhood center. And the neighborhoods off of that are anywhere from 5 to 10 acre blocks. So that network is not necessarily being mandated by your development code right now, and do we want to do that in some places versus others? Similar thing on the streetscape standards. From the standards Paul mentioned, are there any that are missing? And again, just to reiterate, we think there is a walkable commercial street cross section that would need to be added in to use in either mixed use centers or a small neighborhood commercial area. And perhaps another look at some of the neighborhood street standards as well from some of the projects. Or in the alternative, like you currently do now, you do have a lot of projects that come in that don't meet those cross sections specifically or exactly, depending on what's being proposed. So if we're going to deviate from some of those standards, what policies would guide us and why would we do it. And so we always look at it in terms of what types of places are we trying to create, and do the street standards support that type of place. So we have some thoughts and ideas on how you would consider that if you were to deviate from them. And then the last one is the coordination of these smaller scale private and common spaces and how we link them to both the street networks and the larger parks and trail system that you're doing, and how does that coordination work with who's maintaining them and how. And so we're looking at that as well from the development code. That's kind of the list of our big picture topics on what we loosely term the public realm, but it's those things that are going to shape the character of different places in your neighborhood, and therefore give us a lot of guidance on where we need different development standards. Before we throw it to questions, I'll come back to this slide if you'd like, but just to round out the kind of status update, going forward, our next series of issue papers are dealing strictly with development. So we had the public realm series dealing with those public spaces, setting the context, and then the next series is going to look at development, specifically looking at housing types and mixed-use development along your corridors as well as downtown. We're going to continue to monitor the evolving discussion on the road impact fee and the street cross sections, and from there we hope to be putting together an initial draft of the development code, which will be our very first kind of formal recommendation, but certainly not the last, and we hope to have that in mid to late August. With that, I would open it up to any questions or comments you might have from the Planning Commission as well.
Okay, questions? Let's see, questions? The only question I have would be directed more for our staff or Mr. Arnold. So we've seen a lot of, I think, very nice, beautiful streetscapes, road improvements. How is all this paid for? And within our budget that we currently have and where we're anticipated to go with this, if we were to make or take these recommendations, I mean, or will this be part of what we'll see? Is there going to be at some point in time an increase that we have to pass on to our citizens with an increase in the mill levy or something? Because many of these things that we're looking at are not just built one time either. They require regular ongoing maintenance or and at least some continuation of some kind of improvement level.
So the street, or I guess the streetscape options that Mr. Brewster was just talking about are some of the things that are being proposed by the development community at times. A good example is the Rain Dance PUD that we went through and essentially customized all of the street cross sections and some of the lot sizes and different development standards. Some of these standards are going in the direction that the development community wants to go in anyway. And some of them are, most of those, like the Rigdon Farms example, those internal streets and local streets and things like that are development community constructed, and in some instances they result in narrower asphalt and wider sidewalks, so there may be a trade-off in some of the maintenance costs long term. But I think the cross sections that Paul was talking about are really the gateways and the arterial roads, and those, if the example that he threw out was something that the town board was receptive to, getting away from maintaining street trees on all of the local streets and concentrating those efforts more on gateways is the trade-off that we're throwing out there as a
and those that are constructed by development construction, are they maintained by development, or then are they turned over to the town for maintenance? Or does it
If
depend?
if they're built to the town standards, then they're generally turned over to the town for maintenance. If they're a smaller, I guess, private street, then they are maintained privately. Some of the arterial roads, we're still, I guess, investigating all of the options for ongoing maintenance and those. We're having discussions with the city of Loveland right now on an MOU or potential right-of-way plan for Fairgrounds Avenue so that it looks consistent between Windsor and Loveland and doesn't look like two different communities planned it. And Loveland has some of the same questions. In a lot of their examples, they turn over the maintenance of those landscape medians to the adjacent metro district or a private entity or an entity other than the town. Whether or not that's the direction we go, we're still kind of going through that, but we will be bringing more information on that back to you as well.
Okay.
I just have an observation to add on top of that. One of the things we are seeing from the development community, both from the stakeholder interviews we had here, but elsewhere, is, and I would put this in the context of these distinct places where you're trying to get a greater mix of housing integrated into a project or greater degree of walkability in a certain location. But the more connected network is, almost every street they're building there is building value because they're building a network that all of them support development fronting on it for the most part. So they're building very few streets that are simply a collector street to access a different thing to where value is built. And so particularly when the town is taking on all the maintenance, the developers themselves are trying to, we don't like to build a street that we can't really front on or there's not going to be attractive to front on, we won't be able to sell it, but they're building it. But then you all have to maintain it, and if there's not anything of value built along it, it's just a way to get somewhere else, that's a high ticket item to be thinking about. So you're exactly right that we're always thinking about what are we building value so that we can continue to maintain this long term. And I think looking for quantitative evidence is often difficult, but I think from at least a qualitative or evaluating these places, the investment in the public realm is looked at as worth it because these places will maintain and sustain longer because of the quality that's built in at the first step. It's not a direct answer to your question, I know, but there is at least a calling in your plan to kind of head in that direction, and we've seen more communities head in that direction as well. Is every street we're building value, or is it a way to get somewhere else?
Okay, go ahead.
I'm trying to picture how it looks in real life. So, in the papers you gave us, it points out that our regulations are really geared right now toward automobiles. We have a lack of connectivity between neighborhoods and across town. We have a lack of planning for bikes and pedestrians and so forth. So, I'm just trying to picture an example here. If we change the land code use, would it be a case where new development A, new development B would be required to coordinate their sidewalks, required to coordinate open space that fits our updated parks plans? What would this look like in reality if I were a developer or a builder or a resident?
So that's a great question, and it's probably more of an administrative one. From the regulation standpoint, what we would want to at least put in are some evaluation criteria that if there is projects online outside of this, how do we coordinate them? And that's, the devil's in the details on that, but at least having some connectivity standards that tie into that functional class map that ultimately gets adopted will be important. So bringing down the frequency of how often you connect to it is something to consider. It's especially something to consider if someone's coming in and building a walkable street network to begin with. And then where they leave off and where the next project begins is a question of, do they have to stub out or are we actually transitioning to an area where we have less connectivity? One of our first questions there is what context are we going to use for establishing those? And we've done codes where we have a rural level, a suburban level, and an urban or a walkable level. So there might be some evaluation criteria that help figure out how coordinated different projects need to be over time. The other thing we talked about just this morning was the idea of which areas are gonna need a master plan before any of these questions can be answered. And so that's also out there that we're gonna try to build that into the procedures as well.
Anything else?
I want to expand on the value of it a little bit, your question,
Okay.
because I don't know. It's a good question, I think. This has been a ongoing internal question as you went through and also deliberated whether you want to go to these type of streets. Because they do look nicer, but they cost more, I think. I mean, obviously asphalt's gonna be, less, but there's gonna be additional costs in landscaping and such. And remember, I appreciate the value, but the value in residential in Colorado is very little for municipalities because of our property take space. Residential never really pays itself for what we do. So I think the model is what Scott talked about is building these in either Metro District agreements with amenities. You know, I look at this very similar to what like Highland Meadows Parkway is right now, right? So if you go down there, that is maintained by another group. It's not the town necessarily. We maintain the trail system that we agreed to, but the balance of that is maintained by either the HOA and or the Metro District Administration. That was an agreement that the town reached, and that incorporates many of the elements we just talked about as far as the street standards here. So I think the only way we're gonna be able to afford this is particularly private development and ongoing negotiation and development agreements and such, because I don't think we can take these on within residential certainly. Commercial and maybe arterials, there's some element of that. I don't think anybody else is gonna take on, so it's gonna be our responsibility. But as far as a residential component, I think it's gonna be incumbent that we have those discussions with developers.
Okay. Maybe you wanna stay there, Kelly, because I think we're gonna be ready for, unless Planning Commission, did you have anything further? And thank you for your attendance this evening, but future meetings, that is our last item this evening.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
I'm sorry, I have a couple questions related to transportation.
okay.
I don't know how they fit in with tonight, but I got a call from a
Do we
constituent.
need these consultants or maybe?
No.
Okay.
I got a call from a constituent, I know you got one as well, about a light at 392 and Highland Meadows Parkway. People are trying to make a left out of and head west on 392 out of Highland Meadows.
Oh.
It's become a real problem, and many don't even try it. So I was wondering if maybe in the next budget we could get some sort of study or see if it's warranted, or I don't know how CDOT would determine that.
What's our process for requesting a warrant of a light? See that? Make requests. Would you like us to make that request now and see if it's warranted?
Yeah, if it would be easy.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay, is that it?
I think I have one more. My computer shut down. And then you talked about the MOU with Loveland on County Road 5. Have you talked to Larimer County at all? Would they, I know Commissioner Donnelly would be interested, and I don't know if they could bring dollars to it, or if that would just muddy the waters, I don't know.
Where are you in that process?
At this point, planning and engineering have just met with Loveland's planning and engineering staff a couple of times to put together the outline for what the agreement could look like. But we haven't at this point spoken with anyone at Larimer County, simply because that stretch from County Road 30 to Crossroads Boulevard is completely annexed to either one or the other jurisdiction. But we did at the last meeting talk about the need to coordinate with the Larimer County staff that's working on the ranch master plan. And so that will at least bring Larimer County into the conversation.
How about the east, how about the north part that's in Larimer to 392?
Country Meadows area?
Yeah, the discussion with Loveland really is only that area that's with Loveland. That
So
would,
we could take, can we take that discussion we're having now and go over to the county and see if there's elements of this ultimately, or is it the road standards, or you're not doing much with road standards?
think it'd probably be a different discussion, just because we're really concentrating on a common right-of-way standard and streetscape, street lighting, pedestrian connections, those kind of things. With Loveland, I don't know that, it'd probably be a different conversation for that other stretch with Larimer County, different subject matter.
I was just thinking, since they own property on the ranch, that they
Right.
would be,
There'll be apartments, we're gonna
Okay.
need all with all the property owners, including the county, in this discussion.
Yeah, and we did talk about the need for probably Loveland and Windsor planning and engineering staff to take more of a role in the advising at least on access points and things like that in the ranch master planning effort.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay. Future meetings.
So next week, you were gonna have the storm drainage master plan update in front of you. The Water and Sewer Board met last Wednesday,
Yes.
and I kinda slipped in late, but the recommendation from the Water and Sewer Board was it was not ready for prime time yet, or even your pre-prime time. So the board recommended that they hold another meeting in a couple weeks, and the consultant continue working on the effort to bring a prime time report back to them. And then if it gets done, we would like to have that, we're gonna have that rescheduled. So you saw that's been moved. And I'm actually gonna move it again tonight. And, cause I had it for July 17th, I'm gonna move it to July 24th. But, that gives everybody a chance to work on it further. So, looking at the subject matters ahead of us and what's ready to go, we thought, and we're ready and prepared to bring back the entertainment district conversation. Metro districts is not quite ready yet, but entertainment districts is, and so if you're okay, we're ready and prepared to spend some more time on that. And kind of introduce you to the concept. And you said, bring us back more information, see if it's something you're interested in. So if that's okay, we're ready to have that prepared for next Monday night. Okay? Everybody all right with that?
Yep.
Okay, and then, the balance of the workstations, you can see, we have, laid out. And that's all I have to report. We do need to get Metro District back on, and we haven't quite got that scheduled yet, right, Ian?
That's correct.
Okay.
We're looking at the 24th.
Also, okay,
Yeah.
so same time. Oh. No. Well, we're fluid here, so we'll.
You guys get on the same page and come back.
Yeah, real-time scheduling.
You said that does not work?
And it's not gonna work for me, cause I need to
Okay.
get I need to get the, stormwater into you, in front of you, so.
Yeah.
We'll keep on working, plugging away in the Metro District for a day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all the good information and hard work putting together the presentations this evening. Folks who are going to CML, don't forget your shirts in the back, Patty, and any other instructions we need to relay?